Company at Jamestown, the Puritan colonists at Plymouth, known as Pilgrims, had come to America in search of religious freedom. They voyaged across the Atlantic in the Mayflower, suffering months of terrible weather at sea. When they arrived in the New World, they first landed near what would become known as Provincetown. There, the colonists, concerned over their rights to the land and their legal right to establish a colony, drafted and signed the Mayflower Compact, establishing their right to self-govern, while still holding allegiance to the English crown. However, without finding a reasonable place to begin building their settlement, and after a brief but violent encounter with a local tribe, the Puritans found Provincetown unfit and sailed up the coast for better ground. At last, they decided on Plymouth Harbor, building upon an abandoned Patuxet settlement as a base for their new home. Settled between two hills on which the colonists built two forts, the colony at Plymouth initially struggled through a difficult winter, living aboard the Mayflower and building their settlement by day. In March 1621, they made first contact with the Wampanoag. The Wampanoag chief, Massasoit, was hesitant to trust the Pilgrims. Also uncertain of the Puritans was Squanto, a Patuxet native who had been taken in by the Wampanoag. Squanto, or Tisquantum, spoke English and had spent time in Europe after he'd been kidnapped by an English explorer in 1614. He had returned to America with another explorer, whose party was ambushed and massacred by Massasoit and his tribe. Working as an interpreter, Squanto helped the Puritans and the Wampanoag reach an agreement of non-aggression. In the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims celebrated what has become known as the First Thanksgiving, along with Chief Massasoit and several of his men. The celebration lasted for 3 days, and both parties procured and presented various dishes of local game. Like Jamestown, Plymouth was well run, and its early success was built upon by enterprising companies and individuals in England. More and more companies began crossing the Atlantic and established new settlements. Throughout the 17th century, the English began spreading as more colonies were formed and amalgamated with their fellow English neighbors. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, for example, would absorb the Plymouth Colony, and others as it grew in size. As these settlements became more established, trade opened with Europe, and goods, money, and more colonists poured into the New World. Not to be outdone, other European powers attempted to create their own permanent settlements as they grabbed more and more of the coastal region for themselves. What started as small settlements along coastal waters soon became large swaths of territory, claimed in the name of kings and queens from far-off European nations. In 1614, the Dutch West India Company began to establish permanent settlements in the Northeast, around what would one day become New York and New Jersey. Small settlements and fur trading outposts on Governor's Island and along the Hudson and East Rivers marked what was called New Netherlands. In 1624, fearing military incursions from other European powers, they purchased the island of Manhattan from the Munsee Lenape tribe for $24 and constructed Fort Amsterdam at the southern tip of the island. The settlement, which grew within and alongside the fort, was called New Amsterdam. The settlement utilized its unique environment to expand trade and use hydropower to enhance its growth. New Amsterdam was a city of trade and commerce in its earliest form, and always would be. It was a tempting target for the English, who wanted control of the Hudson for themselves. In 1664, 4 English frigates sailed into the harbor of New Amsterdam and ordered the Dutch to surrender the city. They did so bloodlessly, although the event did spark the Second Anglo-Dutch War. In June 1665, New Amsterdam was reincorporated under English law and renamed New York City. Spain, whose early discovery of the New World gave them an advantage in colonizing South America and the Caribbean, began settling in what would become the American Southeast. From their earliest settlement in St. Augustine, the Spanish traveled inward toward their territorial conquests in Mexico and upward toward Canada, carving a path through the center of the North American continent. By the end of the 17th century, Spain's North American empire would cover much of the Deep South, Midwest, and western portions of the continent. France, England's longtime rival and chief competitor in North America, set their sights for permanent settlement along the St. Lawrence River. Still hoping for an easy path to the Pacific, the settlements, Tadoussac, Quebec, Trois-Rivières, and Montreal, followed the winding St. Lawrence further and further inland. France established firm control of the fur trade in the region, then began to extend its influence further down the Mississippi River. In the Gulf, the French established a settlement along the bank of the Mississippi called Nouvelle Orleans, or New Orleans. New Orleans was established in 1718 and was the gateway to the Mississippi, a crown jewel in France's North American empire. As the 18th century began, the numerous settlements continued to grow as Europe carved up great swaths of North America for their own. These colonial territories were defined by various treaties and agreements between the colonizing nations, often ignoring the already existing native population and the complex relationships which already existed in North America. Many Native Americans fought back. Acting as opportunists, tribes worked with and against European settlers, often sparking conflict. Raids on settlements were not uncommon, and the colonists could not always rely on their far-flung colonial protectors if these actions required a serious defense. One of the largest and most violent of these was King Philip's War. In 1675, in the colony of New England, war broke out after a significant failure of diplomacy between the colonists and the Wampanoag tribe and their allies. Metacomet, son of Massasoit, who had aided the Pilgrims at Plymouth Colony, had become the Grand Sachem of the Wampanoag Confederacy and did not have the same tolerance for the settlers as his father had. Disagreements over livestock intrusion on Wampanoag land and the presence of colonial missionaries attempting to convert natives to Christianity was the last straw for Metacomet, who, unlike his father, saw only danger in the existence of these settlers on their land. An alliance of Algonquin tribes led by Metacomet struck at not only New England's far-flung countryside settlements, but the larger, more established towns as well. With no English soldiers stationed in the colonies, the New England militia mobilized to defend their homes. The militia targeted native villages, knowing that it would enrage and damage the Indians' ability to wage war. Metacomet was killed in 1676, just a year into the war. His death spelled doom for the Wampanoag and their Narragansett allies. With no one guiding the conflict, things quickly turned in the favor of the New England militia, who all but destroyed the Wampanoag people and forced their allies out of the New England territory. It was the bloodiest conflict in North America to date. In the wake of King Philip's War, tension between the English colonists and their French and Dutch neighbors grew high. In the Northeast, 5 native tribes located north of the New England colony formed the Wabanaki Confederation after witnessing the demise of their southern Wampanoag neighbors in King Philip's War, increasing tensions with the English colonists. In 1689, just 2 years after King Philip's War had ended, the colonists were at war again, this time at the behest of their mother countries. Fighting broke out as the English-backed Iroquois tribes attacked French settlements, and the French-backed Wabanaki attacked English ones. As French and English soldiers made their way to the New World, the colonists of New England and New France prepared to fight each other. Known as King William's War, the conflict dragged on for nearly a decade and saw French successes in the colony of New York and English successes in Acadia, later known as Nova Scotia, and along the St. Lawrence River. Neither side was able to take their main goal. For the French, Boston. For the English, Quebec. And the war concluded in 1697. But King William's War was only the beginning. It was the first of 4 major conflicts between France and England which pitted their various native allies against one another, and peace was not kept for long. In 1701, King Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain, died with no direct heir and a confusing web of potential replacements, bound by secret treaties and backroom agreements. English, Austrian, Prussian, and Dutch powers scrambled to stop the French from taking control of the Spanish throne. Known as the War of Spanish Succession, or Queen Anne's War in North America, the conflict originated in Europe and did not take long for the fighting to come to the shores of North America. In the south, Spanish Florida and French colonists in Louisiana